Good evening. This is the Thursday, March 7th, 2024 meeting of the Capital Improvements Planning Committee. We are a seven-member committee. I've determined that 6 are present, 4 is a quorum. Therefore, we have a quorum, so we're officially opened and ready to do business. So with that, the agenda that has been sent to everybody, first order of business is the review of the meeting minutes held on February 22nd. Hopefully you've had a chance to review them. And with that, I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
Yeah, he can't.
Oh,
he
you
was-
can't, you weren't present.
at the
Sorry,
meeting.
Bill.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting.
I'll second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Abstentions?
Me.
Yeah.
1.
2.
2.
So,
Bill and Heather. So the remainder of the agenda, we actually could and maybe should talk about items 4, 5, 6, and 7 together. And that is, upon the presentations that were made to us over some past meetings, in particular, the fire department and DPW. The fire department's initiatives do not require town vote, because they're using their own funds, so to speak.
If they're using ambulance receipts reserve, they do require town vote. But it would be a appropriation from the ambulance receipts reserve for appropriation, not out of capital not out of operating, not override related.
And is that the understanding that they're using ambulance receipts for this?
I think in conversations with Mike, are we talking about the cardiac monitor?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, that's what he indicated in his presentation, that his intention was to use those funds. So that wouldn't, my understanding, that wouldn't be a warrant article from this committee.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily, it's up to the committee if you guys want, if we want to make it as a warrant article, but it would be a warrant article on the town meeting
Right,
warrant.
right.
And
Yep.
capital most certainly could opine and say, yes, we approve or not approve, but it's not coming out of stabilization.
I think it needs to, it came before capital because it's a capital item, regardless of where the funding comes from.
Okay.
Capital needs to say yes or no. And it goes to a town meeting article. That's my understanding.
I agree with that. Well, I think, Mark, I don't want to get ahead of you, so I'll let you.
No, go ahead, go right
I was just
ahead.
gonna say, so Mark and I did talk earlier about, where this is one of those years we don't have funding for most projects that may come before the board or the committee. It still is always a good idea to still itemize, prioritize, and rank, and even have opinions as to what should be the town's current capital plan for when funds do become available, whether it's, a next meeting, something special in the fall, or, if there's earmarks out there. But if there's projects that can be funded outside of our usual mechanisms, capital, operating stabilization, or what have you, I think that's perfectly fine to also, to Carol's point, include those in the capital report, just so that they're documented. We reviewed them, we supported them, if that was the case, and put them forward to the townspeople. Does that cover about what we were talking about?
No, that makes sense.
Yep.
So some of the material that's been circulated to you in terms of the pile of papers, for example, one of which is a updated schedule of the capital depreciation and the stabilization fund. And on occasion, we make recommendation as to where we think the funding for a project that we support should come from. What we're trying, or one of the messages of that particular schedule is we've got $500,000 just from DPW, and you've got $36,000 in your capital depreciation fund, which doesn't fund even a single one of the three primary initiatives that they've put forward. And stabilization has generally not been used for these types of purposes. So not that it would impact any of your vote, but it would impact how it is that we're going to push some of this forward to the select board. The second item that I've included in your package is a current, well, current in terms of what I have, a debt service schedule. And what would come under consideration at some point, if that's where we were headed, is that would need to be dollarized for us in terms of what the impact of each one of the three, or the total, or some combination thereof, would have on debt service. Not opining, or nor do I have an agenda in sharing any of this with you, other than I'm just sharing it with you so that you can make your own determinations. The footnote to that is that it's hard to focus just exclusively on CIPC when the select board is meeting and the finance committee is meeting, and there's budget, and there's deficits, and there's override considerations. This debt service schedule, which I think needs to be updated, but it's still useful for purposes of this evening, is, it was reported to the finance committee last evening that water rates are going to go up. It was also reported to the finance committee last evening that the deficit that the finance committee is, quote, wrestling with is at least 775,000, could be as high as 844,000, without some one-time free revenues being added back to that deficit. In other words, our deficit is, if you just allow me to round around, $800,000. That includes our using $517,000 of free cash. If a decision is not to use that free cash, then dollar for dollar, the amount that's not used would add to that particular surplus. Point being is, if water rates are going up and an override is imminent, is this the time to add to the debt service and pass that on to the taxpayer as well? That would be a three-legged stool and a heavy lift for any taxpayer. Low income, fixed income, affluent or otherwise, that's a heavy lift. So all of that, and then the last item is I've included an opera schedule for you, just to remind everybody that there are no opera funds that are going to be available for us to. I'm not suggesting that it's even eligible, but I'm also suggesting that there aren't the funds available for F-350 or F-550 or Freightliner or the like. So that's the kind of backdrop, notwithstanding, however convincing the DPW superintendent's presentation has been made to us and compellingly telling us the need for the equipment that he's put forward to us. The question then becomes, is this something that we can make a recommendation? And I think to Heather's point, maybe what we do is, notwithstanding the financial uncertainty and burden, these are the items that we would otherwise, under different circumstances, make recommendation to you to consider. That kind of sum it up, Heather?
Yes.
So that's the backdrop. So what I've done, notwithstanding the fire department, is I've given you 3 scorecards. And each of the 3 scorecards include the DPW initiatives that have been put forward to us. And you'll also see that there are 3 different ones. They look the same, but they're not. One of them is an F-350, one's an F-550, and one of them is a Freightliner. And then we have everybody's name. So if we, in fact, do want to go forward with our traditional ranking exercise, that would be the scorecard that we would use to either prioritize them 1, 2, 3, or to put them all together, and not prioritize them, or not to put any of them forward because of what it is I've just explained. So not trying to legislate or dictate to anybody as to where you may want to take this. I'm just trying to give the landscape as to what I think our options are available to us. So with that, I would say, what do you think?
When he did the presentation, I watched all the videos and took notes, but I didn't catch. Did he ever specifically say which one of those 3 vehicles he needs the most of the 3?
Well, it's a fair question, and in fairness, Neil Bagdis asked the same question.
Yeah.
Okay, which of these, how would you prioritize them? And as it turns out, speaking of the devil, I don't know that he got an answer. Neil, when you asked
Freightliner.
Travis
I think he said the Freightliner.
what he wanted to do in terms of prioritizing his 3 trucks, did you get an answer?
No,
There was
no, because the reason I asked the question, I was looking for either least expensive or most expensive and how he wanted it, but we didn't get an answer.
Hi, how are you?
So, Forrest, you want to repeat everything I just said to Neil?
Trust me, I'll catch you. I'll catch
Neil's
you.
Do we
benefit?
have another set?
No, I just.
Yeah, I'm putting together a package right now.
Oh, you are?
Good,
Okay.
good job, okay.
Is that state policeman out front want to see you? He's from
Really?
Vermont. Were you speeding from Vermont in
No.
Massachusetts? No?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. We had assumed that you might not be able to, so.
Originally, I had planned, I'm sorry, but it just worked out. I left earlier this morning and got home earlier this evening.
So if you bear with me, I'm going to give you the materials that everyone else has. Thank you. So, would everybody bear with me in allowing me to do a 2-minute Reader's Digest version catch-up? So Neil, there's 3 items that are identified as DPW. Those are the 3 initiatives that Travis put forward. They look the same, but they're different. One is a 350, one's a 550, and one's a Freightliner.
Right.
It's assuming that at some point we'll get to the position where we'll vote on those.
Okay?
There's another schedule regarding capital depreciation. It's a landscape schedule, where on occasion, we might recommend that we use capital depreciation funds, and that schedule's basically saying those funds are not available.
Okay.
They're not sufficient in order to subsidize any of those. There's a debt schedule that is current in terms of the latest one I have. It may not be totally up to date, but nevertheless speaks to the point of, and I think last time we met, somebody had a question, when does the public safety complex mature, and so on and so forth. That's not our hunt this evening, but what this particular schedule was essentially saying is, last evening we learned that the water rates are going to go up, we learned that the deficit that the Finance Committee is contending with is at least 800,000, could be 844, which could speak to the point of an override, and if any of this is funded by way of the issuance of debt, that could be a three-legged stool that would be difficult for any taxpayer to have to shoulder. Gave a schedule regarding ARPA funds, not suggesting that they are available, but suggesting that there are no funds available, even if it was something that a dump truck or a Freightliner could be financed. So now we're at the point in terms of what do we want to do with these particular three items. I'm going to hold the fire department for just a moment. To put forward, do we want to prioritize them? Do we want to say, not this year? Do we want to put all three of them forward? Put them 1, 2, 3 in certain order? And that's when you walked in and we were trying to determine what do we want to do?
Okay. Thank you.
So now I go back to, what do you think we want to do?
Comment?
Oh, by all means.
Okay. At the present time, looking at deficit and override, all of that, I would suggest we pass on all three at this point.
Okay, it's certainly a good thought. Anybody want to add to that?
See if someone could find out his priority on which vehicle, so we'll know that when we take it up later.
Well, I think the concern that we saw last time, I mean, he wanted the dump truck, but he didn't say that was number one, but, I mean, that was $277,000.
He stressed the importance of the need for that.
Correct.
More so over pickups.
Correct, but there was also the discussion about a number of employees, and they seem to be down one mechanic anyway, excuse me, and then I think another member of the team over there. So if they're making do right now with the allotment of vehicles that we have to use, if we buy a new one, all that would do would be take one of the older ones out, but that's an awful lot of money to put forward being understaffed.
Yeah, he wants to replace that 89.
Right, the 89
Mack dump
Mack,
truck.
right. But that's the most expensive item, but again, being short-staffed, I mean, it's, unless they want to call you, Mr. Chairman, and say, do you want to plow tonight? Or do you want to move dirt next Tuesday, or whatever? I think it's a luxury this year with everything else that we're facing. So,
Yeah, I would agree.
when they got a new one last year, I mean, they took delivery of it. It's in service, correct?
I don't, do they, do
Yes,
you
they
know if they have
did.
They
delivered
did,
that
yeah.
yet, Heather?
Yeah.
The dump truck? I think so.
Yeah, the truck came in.
Yeah.
Yeah, this very Freightliner that's in front of us this year, we postponed last year.
Correct.
Because they were taking delivery this year for one that they had acquired a couple of years
2 years ago.
before.
Right.
So it could be argued that they just took delivery of new Freightliner this year.
I think it was late last.
So that could speak to the point of,
Fiscal year, yeah.
maybe this is a good year to skip a year
Yeah.
and revisit it next year. Because
Because
this is going to require, pardon the financial terms, which may not be the municipal terms, but this is going to require the floating of debt, which is going to be on the back of the taxpayer. And quite frankly, as much as I've thrown out the $800,000 deficit number, there are frankly talks in certain quarters that it'll be double that. And if you divide that by the 18 some odd 100 households in Paxton, and water rates are going up, and now we have this, that's a heavy lift.
That's
All
at
right,
lea-
but
that's
the
at
other
least a
thing too is if
10%
we
increase.
have.
Hold on
I'm
one
sorry.
second.
What,
Sorry.
how heavy of a lift? 10% increase on the average taxpayer's tax bill?
I don't know. I
I
would do
don't have the
that.
number, so I
That was the
haven't,
number we thrown around at the DPW meeting, the 700,000 per year.
Well, if you take
That was 10%, as I recall.
yeah, but that was a bigger number.
Mm-hmm, okay.
The DPW building was a much bigger number.
Yeah, but it was a debt that was extended over a much longer
Oh,
period
yeah,
of time.
40 years, I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the simple math?
I don't have it in front of me, but I remember it was like 730,000.
That's just dividing it.
You have to do it.
I know, by rating, so it comes up basically $900, just to take
Yeah.
your 1,800 homes and
It's a-
divide it
it's a
into the
10
1.6
It's a
million.
10%, yeah, it's a
Right.
10% increase.
Yeah,
So,
that's-
yeah, I agree that we don't have
So
the,
some will be less and some will be a lot more.
it would be a lot to ask to go beyond that.
All right, so just to,
So let me just
I
drop
mean,
the other shoe, that's the simple math, and that's where we all were, and I'm glad you did the math for us. Now think of the fact that the override doesn't pass. And what does that do to each of the various departments? I don't want to be over dramatic here, but you have cuts in DPW, and now you got a new truck and you got nobody to drive it.
well, and again, that's why, that coupled
Which would
with,
be the worst possible case, and anybody listening, I hope they didn't hear what I just said, but I mean, that's something to think about, that the override could fail.
okay, but again, if we have, and only God knows this, but if we have another mild winter, I mean, yes, they had to Band-Aid through some of the needs to keep those trucks on the road, but it wasn't like we had 120 inches of snow this year. So, and they have the first new truck and whatever, and this wouldn't be here for at least 18 months. I mean, he did mention that the delivery was out, it was in excess of a year.
Right.
So whatever, if
Yeah,
we
it's not gonna
vote
happen.
yay,
Yeah.
it will not affect what happens in the next 12 months
We're
in
talking
town.
maybe receive it in 2026 sometime.
Exactly.
Plus, the other thing is, if this went forward, and the financing piece was put together, it's probably being pieced together at the worst financial package period of time that we've all witnessed in the last 5 years. So maybe in 18 months, it's going to be an entirely different, maybe not, but maybe so, entirely different financial landscape where it's more affordable than it might be issuing the debt right now. I don't know what the terms are. I don't know if they're more favorable for municipalities, and what I've just said doesn't apply. But I would say, in terms of the general business economic climate out there, this is not the time to, to take out a mortgage, rewrite debt, because it's gonna be expensive to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another reason.
Carol, does the select board have, I guess, any other input? Again, because you deal with select, you also deal with finance, and I'm just asking to bring the whole thing full circle.
Yep, fair question.
So it's the, it's the responsibility of the capital committee to put forth capital items to the Board of Selectmen.
No, that, I understand that, but that's not the question.
What's the
The
question?
question is, how are you looking as a board at I saw the letter stating we're gonna have to have some sort of override, but I mean, what are you seeing or hearing in terms of the override, if it's necessary this year and then into next year, and what, I'm just looking for a futuristic, nothing we can hold you to, but just a guesstimate as to what we might see coming. So if we look at fiscal year '25, starts July 1, what are we looking at in terms of financing? What rates are out there? What would we, you don't have it to go out to '26, but
What we're
short
talking
term.
about, I don't know what we're talking
Are you
about.
talking about in general, what we're looking to do for projects, or are you talking about?
Yeah, well,
interest rates,
project, no,
or-
interest rate, again, what's out there? I mean, Mark's saying maybe this is not the year to finance something, but next year might be. So if we put this off for 12 months,
It's hard to forecast that.
understood, but,
That's
So I
difficult to
think,
forecast.
so I think, Neil, the answer is it depends, right? So the select board hasn't really had this before them to start discussing or talking
But-
about, you know.
but they started with the possibility of an override, so,
So with that being said, so there's lots of factors you can take into play, and I'm working on a model now, right? Because whenever you're looking at an override, you want to know how long will this sustain us?
correct.
Right? So you have to plug in the numbers into your revenue sheet, see what your tax levy becomes, see what the 2.5% each year on that is, build it out to FY '29, add in the new growth, look at those two pieces, look at the average increase of the schools for the past,
Right.
for those incoming years, 3 to 5%, figure out if it stays at 3, if it stays at 5, how long does it get you before you run out of money to cover the increases in the school and increases in the town?
Okay, so just to follow up on, and again, because you're modeling, if the thing were to, the override, whatever the amount, let's just say 800,000, if it were to pass this year, what does that mean for next year? Are we looking at another 800,000 because of things coming out? That's what I'm trying to get
So
my
that's-
mind around.
So that's what I'm saying right now, Neil, right? Like, there hasn't been formal discussion between the select board and FinCom yet. They have to figure out what number, and I think last week's FinCom meeting alluded to different possibilities of how to look at the apple, right? You could look at just covering the deficit, you could look at covering the deficit and, you know, let's say the free cash number, so you're not leaning on those reserves. You could look at the deficit and the ambulance receipt number, or you could look at all three of them. The better probability of having more longevity of not running into the problem is making that numbers the larger of the numbers, right? The larger the number, it's gonna get you further before you run into an issue.
Okay.
Because at the same point, when you're generating that number in the tax levy, remember, you're increasing next year's new revenue, right? So the bigger the base number you can add to it, the faster you're gonna generate a higher number, which is going to allow you to get further number of years before you run out. And next week, I've talked to Mark a little bit about this, but I'm working for FinCom and for the select board, so they have a projection of, you know, what that looks like with the different possible numbers. Also looking at what the school number is, because remember, for the most part, our new numbers are absorbed almost entirely each year by Wachusett and by APATH,
Right.
which doesn't allow the town a lot of money for growth, and that's currently with all of our reserves in.
Okay.
So the answer again is, it depends.
No, and I get I just want to make sure we're not kicking the can down the street this year with a possible override, and then 12 months, we're sitting here again next year and saying, okay, we need another override. That's where I'm trying to get my mind around.
Well, that's where the finance committee and select board gotta get together and prevent that from happening, but let me tell you something you're not likely to wanna hear, is that we're, and Heather's driving it, but we're getting a schedule together now. What are the cost drivers that are causing
The override.
the override this year?
Okay.
And I would submit to you that 80% of them are gonna be there next year too.
Okay. And that's why, that's the,
Right.
I just don't want to have this become a prolific event that we need an override this year, an override next year, an override the year after. But it depends, and I do understand that.
The reality is, if that occurs, it'll break the backs of the taxpayers. They'll vote out everybody, and there'll be massive change.
Okay.
Right? Simple as that. People will have enough, and they'll take action.
Or we're going to see an exodus from town. People will be selling homes and leaving.
That too, yeah.
So,
But it's, I think like Rutland did a big override.
they did, what,
If
$2
they-
million
So if they go,
last year.
if they go to the table this year with another override, it's not gonna be pretty over there,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So.
All right. So
if you-
now that brings me
so
full
To
circle.
Mark's point, if you're gonna do an override, do it right, make sure it's gonna stick for a while, and have a very good compelling argument behind it, because people won't vote for it if you can't.
Right, so
And adding in a few extra trucks may not be as compelling as some of the other reasons, so.
Okay, so now I'm back to saying, I think we should not do anything on the 3 DPW items.
I've got a question.
Bill?
So, last year was my first year here, and I went to a lot of other meetings, and we had a deficit last year, and we scraped bottom to get out of it. Now, it comes this year, and it's much bigger, and even if we raise the taxes, right, what happens, do we raise them enough to really keep this ball going? Or even though we raise taxes, you're sitting here with a deficit and you really don't have the money for that deficit?
I don't have the solution or the answer to that this evening.
The other
But
question,
I also want you to know that select board members, finance committee members
right,
are asking that same question.
okay, so I'll give you a little background. I lived through this myself, I think it was 82.
Basically, what
City of
we're
Worcester went broke,
talking about.
layoffs, demotions, you couldn't buy a paperclip for about 3 years. It's a sad reality, but if you keep playing this game and the taxpayers keep saying zero on the override, you can basically wipe out the town because there's no other income and property. It's almost a catch-22. It's like do you put your finger in the dike this year, and then a hole next year, over and over. And you guys have been here longer than me, all of you. There might be a trend that you could notice of this every time, down, up, down, further down. Something to think about. Even if that truck, we held off on that, takes 18 months delivery. He's not gonna see that for almost 3 years. So hopefully the one that he's got is not gonna rot away. On the other hand, probably, I don't know if many people know about this, they have a mutual aid agreement they put together several years ago, not only for police, but for DPW. If we had a catastrophic storm up here, other parts of the state don't. They can bring trucks in from those states to help out over here. I'm not sure if Travis knows that because he seems to be a little newer. But I was on a committee that put some of this together. So in worst case scenario, without the truck, there is hope at the end of the tunnel. But it looks like he'll wait for 3 years for the truck and hope what equipment he has will hold up. So it's really a tough game, and till we have all the figures of exactly what we have to pay, what we should be looking at, you're looking at a real gloom reality down the road based on the backs of the taxpayers. And we were supposed to try to, the other committee was supposed to be working, I don't know if they have, to bring some type of development into the town to increase that tax base. I don't know if what they've done, but.
Yeah, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Economic Development
Right,
Committee.
yeah, right.
But this is a sharing a view of the report that was made by the members on that committee that are also on the Finance Committee. And that is that the economic development pie is basically split in half. There are 50% of the survey respondents who like the rural setting, and that's how they want to leave it. And there's 50% that want to have a Walgreens, on the town common. Which obviously, don't quote me on that, but I'm trying to make my point. So if you defer to the rural setting, then there's no increase in the capital industrial property tax base or the business tax base.
Well,
And what we're talking about this evening falls on the shoulders of the
okay, just one
residential
more
property
question.
owner.
One more question. When I was a selectman, we voted to build the senior complex up by Anna Maria. It's privately owned, I believe. They must have a tax base, they must be paying big taxes, I assume, I'm not sure. I was out of office by the time that came in. When I look at the economic development, that's what I would be looking for. Is senior living, not bringing any kids in, saturating the school, high cost in education, but a huge plot of land, of buildings that are taxable, and you still maintain that rural setting. The way that's situated, you never even know it existed. So things to think about, you know?
Well
You don't
made.
need a Walmart.
Might be beyond where we are this evening, but point well made. Neil?
Well, just to follow up, I mean, we're really getting into areas we're not supposed to be
Right.
in, but
Exactly.
No, but we're looking for money.
I understand, but so let me just, again, people are aware of this. The MBTA adjacent community, of which we are one, requires a large tract of land with high-density building. So I'm talking 2- and 3-story structure, apartments, or whatever you want to do, to get the affordable index in town into a level that we would qualify. So, and that's one of the things that Holden is fighting and Milton is fighting, and they're both being sued by the Attorney General. We are trying to comply in every way we can, but there's not a lot of land, there's not a lot of infrastructure, meaning sewers, in this town that can handle that. But we're moving that way. That would increase the tax base. They would be privately held, they would be built and sold, but it's just, the economic part of this is very difficult to continue to grow. I only see it coming in as residential. I don't see a lot of business coming. So,
So Neil, I'm not sure that you made it in the form of a
no,
motion.
it was I vote to leave it, pass on
So
all
I
three.
have a question. When was the last time we had an override in this town?
2018?
2018?
1718,
Okay.
How much was it?
400,
100,000 for operating and 300 for the school,
yep, 400 in total.
specifically at Wachusett Regional School.
So we've managed to not have an override for
7 years.
7 years?
Yeah.
And I would propose if we, when considering an override, project it out so we can at least make it another 7 years.
Yeah.
I think
Keeping in mind that last year it was averted, just barely.
It was close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just barely. As you see on the schedule, we used $86,000 of stabilization funds
Yep.
to avoid an override. So there was a motion made, I think there was a second by David, am I?
Yeah, I'll make a second.
So motion made, second, any discussion? So the vote is all in favor of passing on putting these 3 DPW initiatives forward this year. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Two oppositions. So do we need a roll call here, Heather?
Who's taking the minutes?
I am, yeah.
Do you want a roll call?
I have, Neil motioned, I seconded, Forrest and Bill
Or
Voted
are
against the motion.
Against, and everybody else is for.
Is that true?
Did you vote?
I did.
I'm sorry,
I
okay.
did, yep.
Terry,
Yep.
Aye.
Neil, David, and Mark.
5-2.
So the motion not to do anything passes 5-2. Okay.
Will you extend a courtesy to Travis and send him an email? I think he's gonna completely understand.
I'm happy to touch base with them tomorrow, and I'll make sure. I think he understands.
Yeah,
I think they
know
all
he
understand going into
yes,
this.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, he made a presentation last night, and I said, do you want guardrails or a dump truck?
I think he said guardrails.
Which, and I think he did.
I
Keeping
believe he
in
did.
mind that that's kind of what the Finance Committee is up against, that there is safety issues by not having those guardrails, which are not cheap. And they've been deferred for a couple of years, and now it's time to not defer them. So, the 2 that voted against, have we given you sufficient opportunity to discuss? Would you like to add anything?
Well, the only thing I would like to add is, I know especially with the Mack dump truck replacement, Travis, and even before Travis, that's been on their request for numerous years, and it just seems to continue to stay being active and not being replaced. And I know when a couple of us had been to the DPW and actually looked at those trucks. Probably shouldn't even be on the road. The amount of rust and the frame rust, probably I, myself, from what I know, would deem them unsafe. But that's why I would have liked to have seen at least that one go forward.
Neil?
Just, I'd like to follow up with, I mean, do we know what the fleet is right now? I mean, they have that one new one from last summer.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there one that's like 10 years old behind that?
I think the Mac that they have is more, maybe even 7 years behind it.
Okay, and then we have the one, the 89.
Yeah.
So if we ended up condemning it or taking it off the road, what would that do? Save money in terms of trying to keep it running?
Yes. But I guess the impact would be a good winter storm, what would happen.
Okay, but we don't have that crystal ball right now.
No.
And if we have this mutual aid agreement in place, because of elevation, if we got a heavy snow and somebody came in to help us, then for that storm,
That's an if.
I understand, well, it's an if we have the storm, and it's an
Right.
if they can help us. So,
The other lesson I learned in emergency management is always plan for the worst-case scenario.
okay.
Leave it there.
Okay, so fire department. I had some different light shed in terms of where we were regarding that. So, does everybody understand where we are regarding the fire department initiative? Is there a motion regarding putting that forward?
So moved. For the defibrillator and the, whatever it was. I'm sorry?
Cardiac care.
Yes, yes, those two items. Because it was explained, the reason I'm saying move forward, because it was explained that would come out of ambulance receipts. It would not affect the taxpayers.
Correct.
So, all right, thus I make the motion to move ahead with those.
So are you speaking to the cardiac monitor and the chest
Yes, both,
compression?
yes.
So the life
Device.
pack,
Life pack and the,
I got it here somewhere.
okay.
Are they still requesting
Chest,
the air tanks? or-
Yep,
Lucas,
and
yeah,
there's
Lucas.
Lucas 2
Yep.
chest compression.
Yep.
In that presentation? Yeah.
And there's two of those.
Neil
Yeah,
said.
two life pack and one,
Why
well, there's
replace
one,
No,
there's
two,
one of the,
two Lucas.
Yep.
the top?
Yep.
Two
Let me read from his presentation for us.
I'm sorry, Mark.
Replace cylinders, each cylinder $15.95 apiece, beginning FY '24 with firefighter safety grant.
Oh, okay, so grant money.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, no taxpayer money on both of them.
right. So is there there's been a motion to put forward the two initiatives by the fire department, the cardiac monitor and the compression devices.
okay.
And,
Can we
and,
start
and I'd,
there?
and I'd like to add a caveat to that, if we, that we make sure it's definitely coming out of the ambulance receipts, and it's not gonna shift anywhere from now until then.
It is. I had talked to Mike before or the fire chief before he put these requests in back in the fall, and that was the idea, was that they would come from ambulance receipts reserved.
So-
And we can just leave that in the motion.
That's, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd like to see that in the motion, because.
So the
it's-
motion is to read from ambulance receipts. Motion's been made, is there a second?
One question.
I'll second
If
that.
all three are being paid for by an outside source, why don't we put all
Well,
three
let's
on?
get to the second,
Yeah,
the
so
other one
hold on one
after.
second, we got a motion,
I'll
now we need a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, now discussion.
Okay, if they're being paid for by an outside source, we should send all three through. They're all being paid by an outside source, it's not gonna cost us any money, from what I understand.
Well, arguably, the ambulance receipts are costing us money, because that's less money that they can put forward toward the budget. So I think
Yeah.
those two are under ambulance receipts, the other is under a grant. So I think we take a pass on the grant, but put forward the two that are coming out of ambulance receipts.
Okay.
Motion's been made and second. All in favor of the motion as it's been made, signal by
Aye.
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 opposed. None. Abstentions? None. Passes unanimously 7-0.
Follow up?
Yep.
The cylinders that we haven't done anything on that yet to put forward or not. How many cylinders were requested? 10? 6?
I don't think I have that.
This
No offhand?
says 8 to 10.
Okay, so the reason I want to continue discussion on this is because last meeting, when the fire chief made his presentation, we had a discussion here about the possibility of being able to just purchase the cylinder itself and reuse the valve. And that would save significant dollars in terms of the assembly. Instead of buying the assembly for $1,600, whatever, the cylinder might be available for $900. I'm just,
He was gonna look into that.
right, he was. But I'm saying, so if he's gonna be able to do that and then use the grant that he has received that, is that correct, Heather? The grant is in town and we've been notified?
I'm been back for less than 2 weeks.
All right,
now.
that's
I
fine.
don't-
No, I'm just, I didn't know if it had, I believe he
Which-
said the grant was, he was awarded it.
Yeah, and he just got an additional grant of $10,175, so in addition to this $15,500 grant.
All right, and there was also discussion that they were in a,
$15.95 apiece.
correct, 1,600. Right. All right, but there was also discussion that they had applied for an AFG, Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program, as a mutual aid with Spencer, doing this and that. If we have to vote on something to do this before the grants are starting to the grant writers are being notified of acceptance or denial, that won't take place till after the town election, or after the town meeting and election. So if it's the lesser of two evils, and there is grant money that he's requesting to use, as Bill stated, that doesn't cost the taxpayers anything, I would vote that we would move this forward for him to at least research the way he the numbers and the way he wants to use that grant.
So here's what it says and what he submitted to us. Replace the SCBA cylinders, bottles, each cylinder $15.95 apiece, beginning FY '24, with firefighter safety grant, which was $15.50, to purchase 8 to 10 bottles per year until 2027, when the existing expire.
And he reduced the number from 29 to 24.
Yeah.
Correct, that's,
Correct.
well, that's in the application for the new equipment.
Yeah.
So, but what I'm saying is that's cylinder and new cylinder, new valve. If he goes the other way, the price he could get more,
Right.
using that amount, that 15.5.
But isn't that an issue for when he comes back in FY '26?
Yeah.
Not for FY '25?
I would think so, yeah.
I believe he can do that now. That's why I brought the question up in front of him.
Well, I'm more than happy to share that with him formally as CIPC member, if that's the wish of the committee.
I don't think.
But I don't believe it belongs in our CIPC committee report, is my point.
Okay. Fine. I'll withdraw the motion.
But I'm giving you my read. I'm not trying to dictate or legislate to you. That's my general sense.
All right, I withdraw the motion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think these cylinders have to be replaced because they have a
15-year usable life.
expiration time.
Right, and they will all expire in '27.
Yep, and so it sounds like there's
So he's trying to
there's
rotate through.
grants out
Right, so he
there.
doesn't get hit with a
Right.
29, or a 24, 48 bottle purchase.
And there's a grant out there for this purpose, or that supports this. And one way or another, we have to do this. We want our firefighters to have,
Oh, they have to, believe me, there's
the
no way
correct
around it.
equipment,
If
right.
we end up with the same equipment, if the grant, the AFG grant falls through, then we are going to keep in service what we presently have, but they will require new bottles
yep,
by 2027. So if we phase them in,
yep,
that's fine.
yep.
Okay.
So you're gonna follow up with the fire chief and
Yep.
make sure we understand how
Yep.
he presented this and how he plans on paying for it, and if we need to take further action or not.
Yep. And if he needs to submit a report to us, I'll
Yep,
share it with everybody.
So he submitted a plan for years 25 through 29,
Correct.
yep.
which is on the back of his packet.
Well, realizing
is
everything would have to
pretty-
be done by 27.
He said that in here.
Correct, yes, it all, so we can have the plan through 29, but
Cylinders, but this was his plan through 29 with other things
Correct.
involved in that, so.
So Heather, if I jump to item number 9 on our agenda, is there a way for you to give us a Reader's Digest version of the updates? These occasionally rear their mind and their head in terms of where are we on these?
Sure, field lights. So Tiverton Field Lights, my understanding is Recreation Commission as well as the Light Commission met to try to figure out what we can do here for the project. Tara was checking on a couple things with the Light Commission. It looks like we are a go. They're gonna try to work with most of the existing infrastructure.
The man of the hour.
Send message and he will come. Sorry, I got distracted there. So anyway, so we are at the process right now where we're looking to see what we can do with what we have for existing infrastructure. We think that maybe we can add to the poles we already have. It looks like when they did a full analysis of the current existing poles that we have there, they're actually not in bad shape. It's the arms of the poles that are not in great shape. So we're seeing what we can come up with for materials through the light company as well as what we need for additional supplies, and the light company would do the labor. So I think we're gonna make this happen. I don't know if it's gonna be to the tune that's currently on the table. Paxton Center School, as far as I know, everything is good with the security cameras in the kitchen hood. I haven't had any more complaints on any issues with the vendors on those pieces. I haven't had anything else in the inbox, so no news is generally good news on those pieces. Public Safety Complex generator, I believe that's completed at this point, we're all done. And the town IT server, I can't give you specific details for cybersecurity purposes, but I can tell you that we should be finished the migration of the server, everything should be done by the end of the month.
So let me just go back to the recreation one.
Yes.
The
Tiverton Field Lights.
yeah, occasionally the question is asked, are we doing it just to spend the money because it was allocated? Or are we actually doing it right? And is there future value for doing what we're doing? Or are we just doing it because it got approved a couple of years ago?
So-
Because there's all kinds of argument in terms of other fields and other leagues don't have lights, don't need lights, don't use lights. What's the future of Paxton Little League? $80,000, if it were to be recharacterized, is some serious money that we're trying to find as much as we can anywhere we can. So I'm just letting you know what I'm being asked.
So those are great questions, Mark. I think those would be better addressed with the Recreation Commission themselves, because they were the ones who originally put the project forward.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who've done a lot of the analysis on the pros and cons of everything involved. My understanding is still, regardless, this is really a safety issue, both to make sure you have working lights there, and number two is with the cross arms not being currently stable and secure, there's always the concern that they could drop whatever's on them onto someone, and that would not be good. But I'm happy to coordinate, or I'm sure know how to reach out to Jeff as well. If you have any questions for the Rec Commission, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to answer them.
So how do we want to do this? Neil, you want to readdress your question? Mike, did you get the text or,
I got a text from Heather, and
yeah?
so if you want me to come up?
Oh,
you
by
would.
all means.
Come on down.
Sorry, I was coming from one meeting to another.
That's all right.
So I had a follow-up question. I think I understood what we talked about at the last meeting regarding the cylinders.
Yep.
So, and I have no issues with what's going on, other than possible the quantity. You put them in at 1,600, but that's cylinder and valve,
So I got a new price from a different vendor,
okay?
and it came in at 1,400 per cylinder with valve.
With valve.
Yep.
But what if we went the other way and reused the valves?
I would have to ask one of the vendors if they can do it, or yourself, you might know better, because you are a vendor as well, so.
Is there, like,
Your mic.
a useful life on the valves as well?
Is
Oh, it might be a good question. So,
Because I'm thinking propane tank. We buy these propane tanks, we have the valve on them.
Yep.
All of a sudden, we still have it 5 years from now, we go to fill it, and, oh, the valve has been changed now, and you need to get a new tank with the new valve.
yeah,
Yeah,
so,
that's what I'm,
so on a propane tank, it's a little different.
I understand that, but
With
it's
an
just. the-
SCBA,
Right,
you
I understand that.
you can piecemeal it as well. I don't have a price separated,
Yeah.
because I did a price for the tank and the valve.
Okay.
To cover with the, what's called the firefighter safety grant, was awarded by
Yeah.
the Department of Fire
I'm just
Services.
thinking useful life of something like that.
Useful life of the cylinder is
I-
15
I
years.
understand that,
but-
yeah. But the valve,
I don't know, I'd have to ask one of the vendors that specific question. I kind of always envisioned it being one piece.
yeah.
So my 28 years on the department, since I've been here, this is our third set of SCBA. We had an older set of Survivair when I first got on. We had a different Survivair set that was, I think, around 10 years old when it was replaced in 2012. And this set was replaced in 2012. And so we're actually going to do the tanks versus the packs, so we're not making an impact. And part of that was getting around 5 or so of these tanks as part of the grant that I applied for. So we're not using taxpayer money to do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
so I'd hate to see a valve fail, like we take one from one of the old tanks and put it on, and then,
Yeah, I
You
I
run
gotta
that
ask, I
risk.
gotta ask the manufacturers what they think and
yeah, you run that
vendors and,
risk.
yeah.
Okay, so as a vendor in this industry, not of the specific product that you have here, we rebuild valves all the time. Okay, so we're basically putting new components in, new seats, new O-rings, new whatever you need. So it's just the metal housing or the casting is the same today as it was 12 years ago, and it's just putting new components in to make it function as they
And,
do.
and the nice thing is usually, like, something like this, the vendor has the responsibility if something happens.
Right.
So if he's not comfortable, or she's not comfortable replacing that, they'll tell me. And it's much like getting your car serviced in a garage, right? So, and that's something we'll find out.
Got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Say we replace the valves.
Yeah.
And what the 3 is, we have to replace the cylinders. Do we keep the valves and just buy cylinders and put the valves we're buying?
You could absolutely do that. That's my understanding.
That's-
So my understanding, for the cylinders, it's, per NFPA, it's 15 years. We get it
DOT.
pressure tested, yeah, DOT, because it is a DOT
Right, yeah.
tank. So pressure tested every 5 years. Year 15, because it's carbon fiber and everything, it has to go. So if something does get damaged, the tank itself, we can replace the tank and not the valve. So, at the 15-year mark, I've never hit with a tank since I've been here in any capacity. I'm, just finishing up my 3rd year as chief, so I get to learn new stuff every day.
So, I guess, does he need a vote of the CIPC because we're using a grant? Do you want it in the report because we've heard of it?
I think there's a follow-up question, though, is does the grant cover just this year, or it covers all the tanks year over year?
So this grant, I have to reapply for every year.
Okay.
Okay, so Paxton is eligible for $15,500 maximum, and the projects are graded by the state. So with this grant, I also did partial tanks, but I also needed to buy tactical vests and tactical
Right.
helmets for EMS fire and fire response to active threats, shooter, domestics, that kind of stuff. So we put in for 5 sets of those. So because we put the tanks on it, the tanks are a little bit of a lower priority for the state to do, so they lessened our award to $10,000. So, it's just this year, 5 tanks.
Next year.
Next year, hopefully I get 15.5, and
Right.
it's a priority, and I can replace more tanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
and if you don't, then you're at this committee and we're allocating.
Yes, and, you know, my goal with that, number one, I want to bring that project specifically to just to give you an idea of what's going on, what we're doing this year with some of our capital items. The other thing is, yeah, if we don't replace all of them by 2027, we got to replace them at 2027. So
And
my
that would
goal
be-
is to do this in a phased
Right.
approach.
And that would be 58 tanks at that point, if you got to 2027.
So luckily, what we've done is we've reduced the number of riding seats by combining apparatus.
Okay.
So when we originally bought the breathing apparatus in 2012, we had to get 29 of them for all the riding seats. But we've reduced, since 2014, we took an engine and rescue truck we have an engine rescue. In 22, when we ordered the newer truck, we're taking engine one and the tanker and combining that into one truck, so less riding seats, less SCBA. So by the time we're done, we'll only have about 22 to 24 sets of SCBA. So that puts us at anywhere between 44 and 48 bottles and not 59 or 58. So we've reduced the number of bottles that we need to replace, reducing the number of SCBA eventually that will have to be replaced, the harness and everything. And my goal, when I took over as chief, was to reduce our capital footprint to the taxpayer. And I think successfully, we've started to do that.
Yes.
Mike, I hope that when you get to the point where you need the SCBA's, that you do the same thing. You do a phase-in, because when we bought them last time, we had to buy 29 of them at the time. It was expensive, but I imagine in today's day and age, the whole kit and caboodle is a lot of money.
So, you weren't at the last meeting, Bill, so I'll kind of bring you up to speed. So we've applied jointly for a grant to replace them, because we're up to replace them soon. But we applied with the town of Spencer to replace the whole thing if we get it. So in a joint grant, it'll give us hopefully a better footing when they review the grant and see that. And we provide rapid intervention service to the town of Spencer, and they provide it to us. So essentially, we're the emergency response for the firefighters that are engaged in firefighting for the town of Spencer, and they do it for us when we have a fire. And so by doing this jointly, we have a better,
Right.
hopefully bigger target when they select the grants, because we're 2 towns. And that will reduce, that in the need to do it in a phased approach. But realistically, I got to start doing something now. So doing things, especially large capital items in a phased approach, has really been my goal.
Follow up, just, I understand what you're asking for in terms of phasing by 6 a year for 4 years to get the 24. However, we've run into several problems with model changes, that you buy something the first year or two, and then all of a sudden, manufacturers or the industry changes it because of NFPA recommendations or standards. So then you have a certain number of Model A, and then when you go to buy the next ones, whether the model has changed, then you get Model B, and sometimes they're not totally compatible, even though they're made by the same manufacturer.
And
So it's something you really have to be aware of.
we kind of have an issue like that now, where the SCBA we bought in 2012, the new NFPA standard came out in 2013.
Correct.
So the first year we had them, they're kind of obsolete at that point. So we just got to watch, because it
That's a
should be.
strong word.
Well, not obsolete. I don't want to say obsolete, but it's not to the
I
same
mean, it's still
standard.
usable.
They are 100% usable. We're going to use them. If we don't get a grant, we're going to replace those bottles and use them until they die. Because we owe it to you. You guys replace them. But what happens is the additions change, technology change, safety features change from edition to
Just
edition.
requirements.
Absolutely. And they change them every 5 to 6 years. So right now, the ones we have, a 2007 edition, even though we bought them in 2012, which actually increases our eligibility for the grant, because we're 2, almost 3 editions old at this point.
Correct.
So Neil, to your point, I'll certainly defer to the wish of the committee, but my inclination is not to include this discussion covered by a grant
That's fine.
in our CIPC committee report, and here's why. The police department didn't come before us this year, and they had some needs, and it was all funded and subsidized by grants that they secured. So the risk is, if I include it for the fire, then why didn't I include it for the police, and
That's fine.
and why didn't I include it on something that we don't even know about? So in that regard, I think I'd take a pass.
Listen, I just want, I guess, the citizens to understand that I think I'm in favor of what he's doing.
Yes.
If we don't have to put it in the report because you have outside funding, that's great, and congratulations for getting the grant.
And don't get me wrong, I don't mind updating you guys as we go.
No, that's fine, so as
With all
I said,
these things, so.
there was, the discussions we were having were not about, should we buy it, shouldn't we buy it? That's not it. You've got money, if it doesn't cost the taxpayers a penny, then if you don't need to put it in the report because we didn't with police, that's fine, let it go. I'm all in favor of this. And I commend the chief again for finding the grants.
Right.
So,
Good.
okay.
Thanks for responding to the text.
No problem.
Yes,
Any
that's
other
fine.
questions?
No,
I
we're
can
good.
answer?
No,
Good.
we're good. Thank you,
No
Michael.
problem.
So maybe the last item, let me walk you through this free cash thing in the event that you're saying, what the heck is that? Is that a fair question that you might be asking?
You read my mind.
So here's the deal. This has been shared with the Finance Committee, and the decision was to take no action at the moment when it was first shared with them. But in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that that's been the history of free cash that the town has enjoyed, number one, but we have used every nickel of that to balance the budget. And I could have done a 10-year history, but I shortened it and gave you a 6-year history. Not the least of which is the current year, where you see FY '25. We have used $517,000 of free cash in the existing budget that still is producing an $800,000 deficit.
So Mark,
So if we
last-
were to take that out of using it for the budget and put it into stabilization and capital depreciation, then dollar for dollar, I'm rounding, the $800,000 deficit would then become $1.3 million. So hold on, David. In our particular financial management policies that the town adopted a couple of years ago, there is a policy where we wean ourselves away from the reliance of using that to balance the budget over a 10-year period. And I know you know this, but let me say, if it was $10,000 a year, then that doesn't get us where we need to be, because that's only $10,000 a year and the other 90 is being used. So it's got to be $10,000 the first year, $20,000 the second year, $30,000 the third year, until we get to the 10th year where we're not using any of it. Right now, there's been no decision as to what we want to do. There has been some consideration of, well, at least let's do the catch-up years. If we've missed it for 2 years, then let's do this year the catch-up for the 2 that we missed and do it the third year, which would mean that we would take $150,000 of the free cash and vote it for either capital depreciation or stabilization. But again, simple math, that would make the $800,000 deficit $950,000. There are some others that are thinking, let's do it all in 1 year. And there's at least 1 or 2 that say we can't afford to do any of it, so we gotta, defer it again. So we're literally all over the place in terms of what ultimately might be. And the decision was to defer it until we got our arms around what we're looking at for a deficit. So that's kind of what we're looking at. That's what that schedule means. Might not have a place entirely at capital improvements, but capital improvements and finance are kind of sister, brother, cousin committees, and we're just letting you know that's where we're at. So, now,
Question.
ideally, if we took that and we put it in capital depreciation, then for us, we could have perhaps a entirely different conversation in terms of the dump truck. But we haven't done that. And we can't do it on a spec that we might do that. So that's the ebb and the flow in terms of finance capital, who's on first, who's finishing, or what's going to take place first and what isn't. So that's the backdrop behind this. David?
So last year, we used up the $564,000 in free cash to come up with a balanced budget.
Yes.
Okay, this year, we've used 517, and we still have a $870,000 deficit.
Yes.
So there was a definite increase of $870,000 coming from various places. I would challenge that we would have to explain that very clearly to the taxpayers.
Right, which is, to go to an earlier point, not that everybody's
Yeah, the
hanging on every
school,
word we
right.
say, but
Yep.
Heather and Finance and I have saying, we need a single 8.5 by 11 piece of paper saying what's causing this $800,000 deficit.
Yep. Yeah,
And
then-
I think we can do that. The downside, which I said maybe 20 minutes ago, is not all those are one-time expenditures that are causing the deficit. Some of them are gonna be with us next year, and at least a couple of them are gonna be worse, because one of them is regional dispatch, where we now have to fund 75% of it. Next year, we gotta fund 100% of it. So at least a couple of them are gonna be worse even next year than they are this year. So,
And there is a real possibility the voters don't vote for it.
there is,
And if you add on top of that to support a free cash that is good for the long run, you increase that risk that nothing gets voted.
approved,
Right.
totally get it. And that's the beauty, we want everybody to know the difficulty of what we're trying to juggle here, to come with a final resolution. And in the Finance Committee, it's not there yet. They haven't made a recommendation.
No easy answers here.
None.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
none. And we made a tough decision here as a committee this evening, which was not easy. And I'm sure there'll be some disappointment. But the good news is department heads, finance committee, select board, all get it. We're all looking in the same direction. We may end up arriving at the final outcome slightly differently, but at least nobody is pretending that it's not an issue and not a problem, and it needs hard decisions. So. And we've all, perhaps anyways, seen the social media reaction of it, so there's already a lot percolating out there. So with that, is there any new business?
Mark,
Yes,
before we go on, I might have missed it because there's been a lot of discussion, but I heard mention that you're going to put forth the fire items that are coming out of the ambulance fund, correct?
yes.
Did you do a formal vote on that so that it's recorded in the report?
Yes, we did.
We did.
Did you do
I
that?
thought we
Okay.
We
did.
did.
I thought it was 7-0. It was
Fine,
unanimous
that's fine
in
then.
favor.
Yep.
Like I
Yeah.
said, there's been a lot of discussion, and it's being a
Yeah.
bit muddled.
Neil moved and Katori seconded, and all in favor.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was
Just wanted to make
unanimous.
sure that was going to be in the report.
Yeah.
Yep. We got
And the other was a vote 5 in favor, 2 against, and I think
And
we
I
gave
remember
an
that one.
opportunity for the 2 dissenters to speak, and I think they did, so. So we may not need to meet next week. I know how much
That's good.
you all like these meetings, and particularly appreciate everybody's effort to be here. We have a full complement this evening, and Neil, we appreciate you driving 80 miles an hour from Vermont to be with us.
He
Thank you.
must have been in the car with me. Through Rutland and some of those towns, 80 miles an hour is kind of tough, but,
Yeah, yeah.
I hope you didn't do that on Brigham Road.
no, I went right by Brigham Road to get here.
Carol, Heather, do either of you want to add anything further, or?
No, I think the only thing, just to check in, so just to make sure I'm clear, right now, we're still working on the CIPC bylaw. It's not ripe for this meeting, correct?
Well, I think the last time that we met, we decided to defer them because there were 2 members that were not here, you're being one and Bill being another. I don't know if, happy to chat about it. Do you have a copy of them, of the revisions?
I do.
Right.
I swiped a copy, so I have those, but I mean, I
don't
think it's,
I don't think Bill's been.
I've got
Yep.
copies and I read them.
I gave Bill a package,
Okay.
yeah.
but, anything we can hold off to the next meeting. Last year we had a fall meeting. I know it's something we haven't traditionally done, but maybe that's something to keep in mind, is maybe a placeholder to do any housekeeping items, including something like that, so we can dedicate a little more time to it and make sure everything looks good, and everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I would, without pulling it out and speaking from memory, I think you'll find that if you compared side by each, the existing bylaws with the current, I used the Finance Committee effort to maybe codify these, even though I did not codify them as 1-1 and 1-2 and so on and so forth. But I think that they were designed to offer clarity and ease of retrievability and research and information. The controversial item was whether or not the town administrator should be a voting member. And I think this evening you voted without hesitation, but I made that suggestion that it not be a voting member on the heels of last year, where I felt, and maybe you felt the same thing, you were in a tough position to have to vote on a department head or a department issue that, reports to you. The other is that, leading with my chin, I suggested that the assessor not be a voting member, because as it currently exists, it's a department head voting for or against another department, and I just thought that personality-wise, that's not an issue, but policy-wise going forward, it could be an issue. And that's why I was suggesting that those 2 not be voting members of the CIPC. And then there was a little discussion in terms of, well, if they attend, they should vote, and 2 people are not here, let's not talk about it any further. But that's the summation of where I was coming from. So I don't know if you need to comment about any of that at this time?
No, I think it's something to give some thought to, and I think this might be better taken up once we get through the rest of the budget season, when we have a little more free time where we can convene.
Right. So I think the feeling is it's on the agenda this evening. Everybody has it. I think, given the budget and given the critical nature of what we were talking about this evening, maybe that's something that summer work, and maybe if there's a special town meeting, we can have it ready for then. But in the meantime, if you'd like to edit it and offer your suggestions, I'd certainly welcome those, so.
Send me the Word document, I'd be happy to do so. I don't have the Word document.
I know, and I'm afraid to send you the Word document. It might come back edited.
You can guarantee it one way or the other.
Yeah.
But it's better than me having to retype it or
No, I'll.
red pen it.
I'll forward it to you, happy to do so. So with that, is there any new business? Any old business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second. I'm sorry, I just want to get out of here.
A motion's been made and seconded, all in, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None.
Who seconded?
Abstentions? None.
Who's the second?
I second.
Neil?
We stand adjourned. Thank you all.
I started at 5 AM.